My sister scorned me for choosing a simple rancher over her Wall Street titan husband. When their fortune crashed, my family begged me to sell my worthless ranch to save them. Their jaws dropped when my husband revealed he owned the entire valley. The explosion ripped through the Montana dusk like a gunshot, a deafening roar that shook the ground beneath my wedding dress. I froze, my veil snagging on a splintered chair as screams erupted around me. The generator, tucked behind the barn where Lucas and I had planned to dance under string lights, had detonated, spewing flames and shrapnel into the crowd. My heart slammed against my ribs as I scanned the chaos for Lucas, my new husband, the man who'd promised me forever just an hour ago. Guests in tailored suits and glittering gowns scrambled for cover, their champagne flutes shattering on the gravel. My sister Claire's voice cut through the panic, sharp as a blade. Of course Emily's big day ends in disaster. I'm Emily Harper, and that was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Instead, it was the day I learned how far my family would go to tear me down, and how close I'd come to losing everything before it even began. The Whitmores, my blood, had always seen me as the runt of the litter, the one who traded a Chicago penthouse for a dusty Montana ranch. But as I stood there, choking on smoke and betrayal, I swore I'd never let them define me again. The fire was under control by the time the volunteer firefighters arrived, their sirens wailing across the plains. Lucas emerged from the crowd, his tuxedo jacket singed, his face smudged with soot, but steady as ever. "You okay, Em?" he asked, his voice low, the same calm he'd carried through his Navy SEAL days. His hand found mine, calloused fingers grounding me as my pulse raced. I nodded, though my eyes stung. Not just from the smoke. 300 guests, from Chicago's elite to our local ranch hands, stared at us, whispering. The generator hadn't just malfunctioned. Sheriff Daniels, a grizzled man with a Stetson older than me, muttered about frayed wires and gasoline leaks that didn't look accidental. Sabotage. The word hung in the air like a storm cloud, and I felt Claire's gaze on me, her lips curling as if she'd already written the headline, "Cowgirl Scientist Blows Up Own Wedding." Claire, my older sister, glided through the chaos in her emerald green bridesmaid dress, a $5,000 0-cents number that screamed Chicago money. At 35, she was the Whitmore golden child, a hedge fund queen who'd built an empire on ruthless deals and sharper insults. Her toast came an hour later, after the fire was doused and the guests had resettled under the makeshift tent. She raised her champagne flute, her smile venomous. "To Emily, our little cowgirl scientist, who's always loved playing in the mud, may her marriage be as charmingly rustic as her dreams." The laughter that followed was a slap, 300 pairs of eyes pinning me to my seat. My cheeks burned, but I kept my chin up, my grandmother's altered wedding gown suddenly feeling like armor. Lucas squeezed my hand under the table, his brown eyes steady, unbothered by the snickers. "Let them laugh," he whispered, his breath warm against my ear. "We know what we've got." God, I loved him. Even now, with his tie loosened and a faint trace of engine grease on his cuff, because yes, he'd checked the ranch's irrigation system that morning, he was more real than anyone in this tent. My family, draped in pressed suits and fake smiles, saw him as a glorified farmhand. They didn't know the man who'd survived ambushes in Fallujah, who'd traded combat boots for work boots without missing a beat. They didn't know us. My mother, Margaret, leaned over, her manicured nails digging into my arm. "Smile, Emily. People are watching." Her voice was a hiss, her Chanel perfume cloying. Of course they were watching. The Whitmores had built a real estate empire in Chicago, and their world thrived on scrutiny. I was the anomaly, the daughter who'd chosen a PhD in biochemistry over a corner office, a ranch over a high-rise. My father James sat at the head table, his silver hair gleaming under the fairy lights. his expression a mix of resignation and disappointment. Sophie, my younger sister, hovered nearby, her eyes darting between me and Claire. At 29, she was the diplomat, a PR consultant who smoothed over the family's jagged edges, but never quite took a side. "I still can't believe you're marrying a rancher," Sophie whispered, slipping into the chair beside me. Her tone was light, but her words carried the family's judgment. "It's romantic, don't get me wrong, but Mom's been mainlining antacids all week." I forced a smile, watching Claire work the crowd like a politician. "Thanks for the pep talk," I said, my voice dry. Sophie winced. "That's not what I meant." "Ladies and gentlemen," my father's voice boomed through the microphone, cutting her off. He stood at the podium, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the Montana horizon behind him. "I'd like to say a few words about my daughter Emily." My stomach dropped. This was never good. "Emily has always been unique," he began, and I caught Claire smirking behind her glass. While her sisters pursued ambition and achievement, Emily chose a different path. A simpler one. The word simpler landed like a gavel, and I felt Lucas's grip tighten on my hand. "She's married, Lucas, a man who works with his hands, who values honest labor. We wish them joy in their modest life together." The applause was polite but cold, like a winter wind. My mother dabbed her eyes with a tissue, though I couldn't tell if she was mourning my choices or staging a performance. "Your dad's laying it on thick," Lucas murmured, his voice steady despite the insult wrapped in wedding wishes. "He's been practicing that speech for weeks," I replied, watching Claire lean over to whisper to her husband, Nathan. They laughed, and I didn't need to hear the words to know they were about me. This was my family, a gallery of pressed smiles and veiled slights, treating my wedding like a funeral for my potential. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the wooden platform. The sound silenced the chatter, and every eye turned to me. I raised my water glass, because I was too practical to waste good champagne, and looked straight at Claire. "To family," I said, my voice carrying across the tent, "and to those who build their own empires, no matter what others think." Claire's smile faltered for a split second, but she raised her glass with the crowd, her eyes glinting with something dangerous. The toast was a line in the sand, though I didn't know how deep it would cut. 3 years later, I stood in the marble foyer of Claire's Lake Michigan mansion, clutching a homemade apple pie that felt as out of place as I did. The Whitmore family gala was in full swing, a glittering affair of clinking glasses and forced laughter, the kind of event where one-upmanship passed for conversation. My boots left faint dust marks on the polished floor, a silent rebellion against the sterile perfection of Claire's world. I'd traded my lab coat for a simple sundress, but I still felt like an intruder in this shrine to Chicago wealth. "Emily, there you are," my mother called, her voice ringing across the pristine patio. She glided toward me in a cream pantsuit, her pearls catching the sunlight. "We were just discussing the Aspen chalet Nathan and Claire bought." Of course they were. Claire swept over in a white sundress that probably cost more than my monthly lab budget, her smile as sharp as a scalpel. "Oh, you brought pie," she said, eyeing my dish like it might carry the plague. "Tooth, thoughtful." "Apple from our orchard," I said, setting it on the catering table next to a spread of caviar and truffle hors d'oeuvres. "Organic, naturally." "Organic?" Nathan appeared beside his wife, a martini in hand, his polo shirt so crisp it could slice bread. "Or just basic?" The question hung in the air, drawing chuckles from nearby guests. I felt heat creep up my neck, the familiar sting of being the family punchline. At 35, Nathan was Claire's perfect match, a hedge fund shark with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. His deals were as shady as his charm, but the Whitmores worshipped his bank account. Lucas stepped up beside me, his jeans worn but clean, his flannel shirt a stark contrast to Nathan's designer threads. Homegrown, he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of a man who'd faced worse than rich boy taunts. Tastes better than anything you'd find in a boardroom. Nathan's smile tightened, but he nodded with exaggerated interest. Right, the ranching thing. Still playing cowboy, Lucas? We're doing well, I said, keeping my voice level. The ranch turned a profit last year. Again. Claire's laugh was like shattering glass. Profitable? Oh, Emily, that's adorable. Nathan just closed a deal worth more than your little cow patch makes in a lifetime. Actually, my father interjected, strolling over with a bourbon in hand. I've been meaning to ask about that ranch of yours. When are you planning to do something substantial with your lives? His tone was casual, but the word substantial was a blade. My mother shot him a warning glance, but her eyes gleamed with curiosity, like she wanted the answer too. We're happy, Lucas said simply. The work's honest, the life's good. Honest work, Nathan repeated, swirling his martini. That's one way to put it. Watching you two at these events is like a PBS special. Here we see the rugged ranch folk in their natural habitat. The group around us laughed, and I saw Sophie wince from across the patio. She didn't speak, though. She never did when it mattered. At least we sleep well at night, I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. The laughter died. Nathan's smile vanished. What's that supposed to mean? Claire asked, her voice sharp enough to cut steel. Nothing, I said quickly. Just that hard work makes you tired. But the damage was done. I'd crossed a line, and the air crackled with it. My mother clapped her hands, her smile forced. Who wants to see the new infinity pool? The group dispersed, following Claire toward the latest monument to her wealth. I started to follow, but Lucas caught my arm. I'm going to check the truck, he said. Make sure we didn't leave the windows down. I knew he just needed air. These gatherings were a battlefield for him, watching his wife get dissected, while he stood powerless. I'll come with you, I said, but he shook his head. Stay, enjoy your family. The word enjoy carried a weight we both understood. I found myself alone by the pool, the water's surface reflecting the setting sun like liquid gold. Laughter drifted from the pool house tour, and I wondered what it would feel like to belong in that world instead of standing on the outside, always looking in. They're brutal today, Sophie said, appearing beside me with 2 glasses of wine. I took one gratefully. Today? This is just Tuesday for them. She hesitated, then said, It's not always like this, is it? I turned to her, my patience thin. When was the last time anyone in this family asked about my work without turning it into a joke? She was quiet, her fingers tightening around her glass. Things are tense lately. Nathan's deals. Claire's stress. Stressed about what? I pressed. Sophie glanced around, then leaned closer. Some of his investments tanked, big ones. Claire's been dropping hints about selling assets to cover losses. Before I could dig deeper, Claire's voice sliced across the patio. Emily, come settle a debate for us. I walked back to the group, wine in hand, bracing myself. We were discussing career paths, Claire said, her smile predatory, and I was saying how you've found your calling. What do you call it? Subsistence ranching? The group laughed on cue. Don't you ever wonder what you could have done if you'd aimed higher, instead of settling for this quaint little life? Her words were a gut punch, every doubt I'd ever had about my choices wrapped in her perfect cruelty. She stepped closer, her voice dropping. I'm just saying, some of us dream bigger than apple orchards and county fairs. Real life happens in Chicago, not in your dusty little bubble. The silence was deafening. Even the guests who'd laughed looked uneasy. I set my glass down, my hand steady despite the storm inside me. You're right, I said quietly. Real life does happen, and sometimes it burns you when you least expect it. 6 months later, The cracks in the Whitmore facade started to show. It began with missed calls. My parents, who used to flood my inbox with updates about Claire's latest triumphs, went silent. When I did catch them, their voices were strained, like they were reading from a script with missing pages. "How's Claire?" I asked during one awkward call with my mother. "Oh, you know Claire," she said, her tone too bright. "Always busy, always conquering the world. And Nathan, he's fine. Listen, honey, I have to run." The line went dead, and I stared at my phone, frowning. In 30 years, my mother had never hung up on me unless someone was bleeding. The next clue came at Sophie's birthday dinner, a low-key affair at a Bozeman Italian joint. Nothing like the Whitmore norm. "Where's everyone else?" I asked as Sophie slid into the booth across from me and Lucas. "Mom and Dad had a thing," she said, picking at a breadstick. "Claire and Nathan are dealing with work drama." "Work drama on a Saturday night?" I raised an eyebrow. Sophie avoided my eyes. "It's complicated." I leaned forward. "What kind of complicated?" She glanced around, then whispered, "Nathan's hedge fund is in deep trouble. SEC's sniffing around. Fraud allegations." My chest tightened, not with sympathy, but with something sharper. "How bad?" I asked. "Bad enough they're selling the Aspen Chalet. And the yacht. Claire's been asking cousins for loans." Lucas, quiet until now, spoke up. "They asked you for money?" Sophie shook her head. "Not yet. Probably because I don't have any." She finally met my eyes. "They haven't called you, have they?" "No," I said, my voice hard. "But then, we're just simple ranch folk. What do we know about real money?" Sophie winced. "You heard about Claire's gala comment?" "I was there," I reminded her. "Front row for the Claire Whitmore show," she sighed. "She's been off lately, snapping at everyone. Even the golden child has rough days." We ate in silence after that, but I could feel Lucas watching me, reading the wheels turning in my head. Later that week, we were inspecting the ranch's new irrigation system when my phone rang. Unknown number. "Emily, it's your mother," came the shaky voice, older than I remembered. "Mom, are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart, just tired." "Can you come to Chicago this weekend? We need to talk. As a family." The word family sent a chill down my spine. In Whitmore speak, family talk meant bad news. "What's going on?" I asked. "It's better in person. Saturday, 2 o'clock? I glanced at Lucas, who was pretending not to listen while calibrating a sensor. His shoulders were tense. "I guess so," I said. "Should I bring anything?" "Just you." And Lucas, of course. The line went dead. "Family meeting?" Lucas asked, not looking up. "Sounds like it." He straightened, wiping his hands on his jeans. "About what?" She wouldn't say. "But if Sophie's right, they're coming for money." It wasn't a question. We both knew it was true. That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling beams of our farmhouse. Part of me, bigger than I'd admit, was almost giddy. After years of being the family disappointment, they needed me. The irony was delicious. All those jabs about our dusty little life, and now they'd come crawling to the cowgirl they'd mocked. But another part, the part that still remembered begging Claire to let me tag along as a kid, ached at the thought of their pain. Saturday morning dawned gray and bitter, the Montana sky heavy with clouds. Lucas was quiet as we drove to the airport for the flight to Chicago, his hands steady on the wheel, but his jaw tight. "Whatever they ask," he said as we pulled into the parking lot, "you don't owe them a damn thing." "I know," I said, but he shook his head. "Do you? Because you've got a soft heart, Em, and they know how to play it like a fiddle." I looked at the Chicago skyline looming ahead after we landed. Its steel towers, a far cry from our open fields. The Whitmore estate, a Gold Coast mansion, felt smaller than I remembered. Its grandeur tarnished by the weight of what was coming. My phone buzzed as we climbed the front steps. a text from an unknown number. "Emergency family meeting, please come, we need you." It was Claire, the sister who'd spent decades telling me I'd never measure up, now begging for help. My heart pounded as I rang the doorbell, the sound echoing like a gavel. Time to face the family who'd never seen me and find out what real life looked like when it came knocking on my door. The living room was a courtroom when we walked in, the air thick with tension. My parents sat on a leather couch, looking older, frailer than I'd ever seen. Claire perched on an armchair, her designer suit wrinkled, her usual polish cracked. Nathan stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, hands in his pockets, his back to us. Sophie sat on an ottoman, clutching her hands, her eyes apologetic. Lily, Claire's 10-year-old daughter, hovered in the corner, her white dress pristine but her expression confused. "Emily, Lucas," my father said, gesturing to 2 chairs positioned like a dock. "Thank you for coming." We sat, and I felt the weight of their stares. "So," I said, breaking the silence, "what's this about?" My mother twisted her wedding ring, a nervous tick from my childhood. "We need to discuss the family situation." "What situation?" I pressed. Nathan turned, and I was shocked by how haggard he looked, his cocky charm replaced by something desperate, almost feral. "Don't play dumb, Emily," he snapped. "You know exactly what's going on." "Nathan," Claire warned, but her voice lacked its usual bite. "No, I'm done pretending," he said, stepping forward. "Sophie told you about my fund, didn't she? The investigations?" I glanced at Sophie, who was studying her hands like they held the secrets of the universe. "She mentioned trouble," I said carefully. "Trouble?" Nathan laughed, bitter and jagged. "That's one way to put it." My father cleared his throat. "What Nathan means is, we're facing financial ruin. Significant ruin." The words hit like a shockwave. I'd suspected, but hearing it was different. "How significant?" Lucas asked, his voice low. "Everything," my mother said, her voice breaking. "The estate, our savings, the retirement accounts, gone." I looked at Nathan, who was glaring at me like I'd caused this. "I'm sorry," I said, choosing my words. "But why are we here?" Claire leaned forward, her eyes glinting with something I hadn't seen before. Desperation. "Because we need your help, Emily." It was the first time she'd ever looked at me like I mattered. "Our help?" I repeated. "Your ranch," my father said bluntly. "We need you to sell it." The words were a punch to the chest. "Excuse me?" "It's the only asset not tied to this mess," my mother pleaded. "If you sell, we can pay the debts, start over." Lucas's hand found mine, his grip warm and steady. "You want us to sell our home," I said slowly, "to fix your mistakes?" "It's not about mistakes," Nathan said, his voice rising. "It's about family. Doing what's right." "What's right?" I snapped, my temper flaring. "You're asking us to burn our lives down for you." Claire stood, her composure cracking. "Emily, you're playing house on a patch of dirt. This is real life. Real consequences. We're your choices," I shot back. "We're family," my mother cried, tears streaming down her face. "Family helps family. Where was that loyalty when you spent years mocking us?" I stood, my hands shaking. "Where was it when you treated Lucas like a hired hand?" "That's not fair," my father said, but his voice was weak. "Isn't it? Let's talk fair. Every gala, every holiday, you made us feel like failures, and now when your golden boy screws up, you expect us to pay?" "This isn't about the past," Claire said, her voice raw. "This is about survival." "Your survival," I said. "Built on our sacrifice," Nathan exploded. "It's just land, dirt and cows and nothing. You could buy another ranch anywhere." The silence was deafening. Even he seemed to realize he'd gone too far. Lucas stood, his movements slow, deliberate. "I think we're done here," he said. "Wait," my mother begged. "Please, just think about it." "We are asking for a decision," my father said, his voice hard. "By Monday. The creditors won't wait." "Monday?" I stared at him. 2 days? To decide whether to destroy our lives? "You're being dramatic," Claire said, but her voice shook. "It's just property. We're talking about lives here, Lily's future." "What about our future?" I shot back. "You don't have kids," she said, her words a dagger. "You don't understand what's at stake." Lucas's jaw clenched, his hands balling into fists. "We're leaving," I said, grabbing my bag. "Emily, please," my mother called as we headed for the door. I turned back, meeting their eyes. "I'll think about it. But you think about this. What kind of people ask their family to lose everything to save them from their own mess?" As we stepped into the Chicago dusk, my father's voice followed. "You'll see sense when you remember what you owe us, Emily." Lucas paused, his hand on the car door, knuckles white. "What we owe you," I said, loud enough for them to hear. "After 30 years of being your disappointment, what exactly do we owe?" No one answered. The drive to the airport was silent. The city lights blurring past, I stared at our reflection in the window, wondering how we'd come to this, and what Lucas wasn't telling me, because as we boarded the plane back to Montana, I saw a glint in his eyes, something hard and calculating, like a soldier preparing for war. Back at the ranch, the air felt different, heavier. The fields stretched golden under the evening light, but the peace was a lie. 2 days ago, I'd found one of our lab machines leaking, a toxin that could have killed my team if I hadn't caught it. The tech swore it was sabotage, the valves tampered with in a way that screamed intent. And last month, a fire had torn through our research barn, reducing years of data to ash. The fire chief called it arson, though no suspects were named. Now, as I followed Lucas to the barn's back office, my stomach churned. "I need to show you something," he said, his voice low. "Lucas, I'm not selling. I don't care what they—" "This isn't about selling," he interrupted, unlocking a filing cabinet I'd never seen him touch. "Sit down." He spread papers across the desk, patents, financials, legal documents with numbers that made my head spin. "What is this?" I asked, squinting at a patent titled Advanced Biotechnological Irrigation System. "This," Lucas said, pointing to it, "is the system we use in the North Field. Patented 3 years ago, licensed to farms across 20 states. He pulled another. "This is the soil analysis software I built. Another patent, used globally." I stared at him, then at the financial statement he slid over. The numbers at the bottom weren't just big, they were obscene. Are we? "Terra Innovations," he said. "Our company, worth $100 million, 0 cents. The ranch is its R&D hub." My mind reeled. "You've been running a tech empire? This whole time?" "A quiet one," he said. "Most clients don't know the tech comes from a Montana ranch. They just know it works." "Why didn't you tell me?" My voice cracked. "I wanted to be sure," he said, his eyes steady. "I wanted to build something real before I made promises." "Real?" I stood, pacing to the window. "You let me think we were scraping by. You let my family tear me apart, thinking we were nothing." "We were never scraping," he said. "Bills paid, no debt." "I didn't want you to feel small, Em. I wanted to see who they really were." "Who they were?" I spun to face him. "You used me as bait to test my family?" His silence was answer enough. "There's more," he said finally. "Nathan's fund, he bet against us, shorted Terra's stock, lost $15 million, 0 cents of your parents' money, betting we'd fail." The room tilted. "He lost their fortune? Betting against us?" "Every penny," Lucas said. "He thought anything tied to ranchers was doomed, staked it all on our failure." My phone buzzed. A text from Sophie. "They're coming to the ranch tomorrow, all of them. Dad says they won't take no for an answer." I showed Lucas. He read it, his eyes glinting with something dangerous. "Good," he said. "Let them come." "They'll demand we sell," I said. "They'll learn the truth," he replied, his smile sharp. "All of it." I looked at my husband, seeing not just the man I loved, but a strategist who'd played a long game I hadn't even known existed. "What's your plan?" I asked. "To give them what they've always wanted," he said. "A lesson in who we are." As I followed him out of the barn, the Montana stars burning above, I realized I was standing on the edge of something bigger than a family feud. This was war. And I wasn't sure who'd be left standing when the dust settled. The Montana night was black as coal, the kind of dark that swallows you whole, when the gunmen came for us. Lucas and I were driving back from the airport, the hum of our old pickup the only sound on the empty highway. The Chicago meeting with my family, their desperate plea to sell our ranch, still burned in my mind, a wound too fresh to ignore. I was staring out the window, the stars blurred by my racing thoughts, when headlights flared behind us. Too close, too fast. "Hold on," Lucas said, his voice sharp, the Navy SEAL in him snapping to life. Before I could ask why, a black SUV roared past, swerving to block the road. A figure in a ski mask stepped out, rifle raised, and the crack of gunfire shattered the night. I screamed, ducking as a bullet punched through the windshield, spiderwebbing the glass. Lucas yanked the wheel, veering onto the shoulder, gravel spitting under the tires. "Stay down, Em," he barked, his hand shoving me toward the floorboard. Another shot rang out, grazing the truck's hood, and I felt my heart lodge in my throat. This wasn't random. The Chicago meeting? Nathan's shifty eyes? Claire's veiled threats? It all clicked. Nathan's creditors, the kind of people who'd sink a $15 million 0-cents hedge fund and not blink, had sent this killer. They wanted our ranch, our lives, to settle his debts. Lucas floored the gas, the truck lurching off-road into the sagebrush, the gunman's SUV in pursuit. "We're not dying tonight," he growled, his knuckles white on the wheel. I clung to the seat, praying he was right, but the rifle's muzzle flash in the rearview told me how close we were to losing everything. I'm Emily Harper, and I thought my family's betrayal was the worst thing I'd face. But as we tore through the Montana wilderness, bullets chasing us like hounds, I realized the Whitmore's cruelty was just the spark. The real fire was coming, and it was hungry. We lost the gunman after a heart-stopping chase, Lucas weaving through back roads he knew like his own pulse. He'd learned evasion in the SEALs, and tonight it saved us. The SUV vanished into the night, either outmaneuvered or biding its time. We pulled into our ranch at 2 a.m., the farmhouse's porch light a faint beacon against the dark. My hands shook as I climbed out, the adrenaline crash leaving me hollow. "Who the hell was that?" I demanded, my voice raw. Lucas checked the truck, his jaw tight, inspecting the bullet holes like they were battle scars. "Nathan's creditors," he said, confirming my fear. "He's in deeper than we thought. Loan sharks, maybe worse." I wanted to scream, to march back to Chicago and shake answers out of my sister's smarmy husband. Instead, I followed Lucas inside. The weight of his earlier revelation, Terra Innovations, our $100 million 0-cents secret, pressing on me like a stone. In the kitchen, under the flicker of a single bulb, I confronted him. "You knew Nathan was trouble," I said, my voice low but sharp. "You knew about Terra, about the patents, the money, and you let me sit through years of their insults thinking we were just ranchers." Lucas leaned against the counter, his flannel shirt still streaked with dust from the chase. "I didn't let you think anything, Em. I built something real, for us. I kept it quiet to see who they were, who you were, when the world called you small." His words stung, a blade wrapped in love. "You tested me," I said, my eyes burning. You let me doubt myself, let Claire and my parents carve me up to prove a point? He stepped closer, his brown eyes steady but pained. I wanted us to be free. From them, from their judgment. I wanted you to choose this life because it's yours, not because it's all you thought you could have. I turned away, my chest tight. Lucas had built Terra Innovations, a biotech empire hidden behind our ranch's humble facade. 40 global patents, irrigation systems, soil analysis tech, drought-resistant crops had made us multimillionaires, and I'd had no clue. Worse, Nathan had bet against us, shorting Terra's stock and losing $15 million, 0 cents of my family's fortune. Their arrogance, their dismissal of our cowgirl scientist life, had blinded them to our success. But Lucas's secrecy felt like a betrayal of its own. A wall between us I hadn't known was there. I need air, I muttered, pushing past him to the porch. The night was cold, the stars sharp, and I wondered how many more secrets were waiting to break us. The next morning the Whitmores descended like a storm. 3 sleek cars pulled into our driveway at 2 p.m., kicking up dust that clung to their polished exteriors. I watched from the kitchen window, my coffee gone cold, as my parents, James and Margaret, climbed out, their faces grim. Claire followed, clutching a leather portfolio, her designer heels sinking into the gravel. Nathan adjusted his tie, his eyes darting like a cornered animal. Sophie trailed behind, holding Lily's hand, the 10-year-old's white dress a stark contrast to the tension. My family had come with lawyers. 2 men in suits who looked like they charged by the syllable, ready to demand we sell the ranch to save their sinking empire. Lucas met them at the door, his work boots scuffed, his flannel shirt a deliberate middle finger to their Chicago polish. "Come in," I said, stepping aside, my voice steady despite the knot in my gut. They filed into our living room, their eyes scanning the simple furniture, their handmade quilts, the family photos on the mantel. It was the same room they'd visited a dozen times, but now they were calculating its worth, measuring what they could take. "Please sit," Lucas said, gesturing to the couch. "We'd rather stand," Nathan snapped, his voice tight with desperation. "This won't take long." "Actually," my father said, setting a folder on our coffee table like a judge's gavel, "we brought paperwork to make this easier. Sale documents for the ranch, appraised, buyer lined up, sign and we're done." I stared at the papers, then at him. "You had our home appraised without asking us?" My mother's voice was strained. "We're trying to be efficient, Emily. Time's a factor." "Whose time?" Lucas asked, his tone mild but edged. "Don't play games," Nathan said, stepping forward. "You know what's at stake. Your parents' estate, our accounts, Lily's college fund, gone unless you sell."